Well, if you think that that film clip is an exaggeration made for Hollywood, kind of event, then you're not in touch with the way things have changed in our schools. If you get online, you listen on the internet, you can listen to recordings from all over the country, things like the quote that I used in the newsletter from Cornell University, a biology class, where the professor stands up and says, "There is no God, there is no meaning to life, there is no life beyond this life." Unfortunately, that's not just something that college students have to struggle with. Maybe they're at the point they ought to struggle with that for themselves. But, also increasingly, it's in high schools. My brother-in-law teaches at one of the most prestigious private schools in Atlanta. He teaches biology. He is an atheist, and he requires his students to read books by Richard Dawkins, one of the most virulent of atheists. And he assures me that the majority of other high school biology teachers that he knows in the private schools are doing the same thing. Well, this morning on the church's 131st anniversary, we're beginning a new series called Believe. It's an essential series in the times we live in, because we're now living in a culture that is more hostile to Christianity than at any time during this church's 131-year history. It's a time when our children are being confronted and indoctrinated in public and private school classrooms at earlier and earlier ages. In classrooms across America, a virulent new kind of militant atheists are teaching under the guise of science and history and math and philosophy and English their own nihilistic, atheistic beliefs as if these were proven science. These, for the most part, very mediocre scholars in their own fields stand before their classrooms and pontificate that there is no God, there is no life after death, there is no meaning or purpose to life, and then they're surprised when students are committing suicide in record numbers because they have no hope. And Christians are being ridiculed as if they're idiots if they don't concede that science has disproven God, which it hasn't. While at the same time, giants like Nobel Prize-winning biologist and medical Dr. Francis Collins, who led the Human Genome Project and is currently the director of the National Institute of Health, are devout practicing Christians. Many world-class scientists are committed Christians, but the public doesn't know that, and most Christians don't know that either, and they're buying into the lies that the new atheists are selling and the liberal media is spreading. 1 Peter 3:15 instructs us, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. And yet most Christians freeze when supposedly intellectual individuals make some ridiculous anti-Christian assertions as if these were facts. So for the next 6 weeks, we're going to study Christian apologetics so we can give a reasonable answer to those who question the legitimacy of our faith. Now, Christian apologetics doesn't mean that we are apologizing for our faith. The Greek word apologia, it's the word translated in 1 Peter 3:15 as give an answer, means more literally a speech in defense of what one has done or of truth which one believes. So Christian apologetics is making a defense for the faith we have that we've placed in Jesus Christ as the Son of God. So who are the new militant atheists and what are their arguments? Well, the list is a long one because there's money to be made in putting Christianity down, and there are a lot of people today who want to be free of Christianity's moral restrictions. The new militant atheists are a pretty sophisticated bunch. There's Oxford biologist Richard Dawkins, the author of the book The God Delusion that sold more than 2 million copies. There's the English writer Christopher Hitchens, who has a Richard Burton kind of voice and is a regular contributor to Vanity Fair magazine and is author of the book God is Not Great. There's Sam Harris, who wrote the book The End of Faith, the philosopher Daniel Dennett, and the bioethicist Peter Singer, to name just a few. These are the new atheists, and they're very different from the old, less sophisticated atheists like Madalyn Murray O'Hara, who just wanted to make sure the Ten Commandments didn't hang in public places. These new atheists don't want religion to exist at all. What are their arguments? Well, if you boil them all down, they're basically three major false assertions. The first is that there is nothing but matter. There's no God, there's no meaning to life, there's nothing beyond this life. Their creed is if you can't test it and quantify your data and measure it in a laboratory, it's nothing but idle speculation and superstition. That assertion, by the way, like most of their assertions, is one that can't even be tested scientifically. Those assertions don't even meet their own standard. The second assertion is the false dilemma. You have to choose between science and God. They say science is based on reason, Christianity is based on faith. So the only intellectually respectable option is to choose science. And finally, they repeatedly imply that Christianity is not only baseless superstition, it, like all religions, is evil. It's evil because it causes many of the wars and much of the human suffering in the world we live in. And they will say Shia and Sunni are fighting in Iraq, the Israelis and Palestinians are fighting in the Middle East, Hindus and Muslims are fighting in India, Protestants and Catholics are fighting in Ireland. All of these, they assert, are religious wars. And then they point to the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition and the Salem witch trials as conclusive proof that Christianity creates just as much conflict as the other religions, so it's evil too. And their assertion is if we would just get rid of belief in God and have a secular society, the world would be a more scientific, rational, and peaceful place. Their goal then is to eliminate all religions. Their strategy in the West is to make every Christian feel like a total idiot for believing in Christianity. So, what is the Christian response to these assertions? Well, the basic counter-argument is first that the conflict is not one of science, it's one of philosophy and worldview. Now, this discussion goes all the way back to the Greeks. The Greek philosopher Democritus, which was one of those atheists listed on the board, and I can give you 20 boards of people more impressive than the people he listed, but who are believers. The Greek philosopher Democritus and Leucippus taught that matter is all there is. There's nothing more. These philosophers that you've never heard of were opposed by Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, the greatest minds in the ancient Greek world, who asserted the materialistic view didn't explain the reality we experience in life. Love is more than chemistry, and ethics is far more than the biological survival of the fittest. Today, the issue is expressed in terms of matter and just transcendence. Everyone believes there's matter, but most people also believe that there are things beyond the things we can physically see and taste and touch, and these are real even though we can't measure them, even though we can't quantify them. Most people believe there's something beyond this life, things that transcend the material world around us. Now, to me, the proof that this is not a matter of science but of philosophy is that while there are brilliant physicists like Stephen Hawking who are atheists, they're equally brilliant, but perhaps less well-known people like Nobel Prize-winning physicist William Phillips, who's a very devout Christian, as is the current director of NIH, Francis Collins, the physician, geneticist, who's noted for his landmark discoveries of diseased genes and for his visionary leadership of the Human Genome Project. The fact that they're brilliant scientists who are both believers and atheists proves this is not a question of science, it's a question of philosophy. And you're not an idiot if you are a committed Christian who believes the Bible. You need to carry just a few facts in your head as you're talking with people that you can drop in place, and one you might want to drop sometimes in a conversation is that while only 33.2% of the world population is Christian, 65.4% of the Nobel Prize-winning scientists have been Christians. Now, you can say, well, maybe the Nobel Prizes are slanted toward people in the West who have better educational opportunities. But the point I want to make is that for the last 2 centuries, the major thinkers in science who've won Nobel Prizes have been people who classify themselves and call themselves Christians. So the new atheist assertion that you have to choose between science and God is a false dilemma. The choice to believe in God has nothing to do with the rejection of true science. Your choice is between an atheistic, nihilistic philosophy and worldview that's held by less than 1% of the people in the world and the position held by more than 98% of the people in the world that believe in transcendence. that there are real things that are beyond what we can see, taste, and touch, that there is something beyond this life. There are three additional misconceptions that the new atheists are promoting that are confusing many people. First, they promote a misconception of God. The atheist suggests that, like the professor in the film clip you just saw, the concept of God was invented by people to explain things they couldn't explain, like lightning. So as science explains things, God is now unnecessary, so we've outgrown God. What the atheist is asserting is that we believe in a God of the gaps. So as we learn more and more, there's less and less need for God as we understand the scientific reasons that things happen. In reality, though, I don't know a single serious Christian that believes in a God of the gaps. Christians believe in a God who's revealed himself to us through Scripture, through history, through prophecy, and ultimately through Jesus Christ, and is Lord of all of the things we understand and the things that we don't. Besides, their story about how God was invented, something else, an assertion they make, which they have absolutely no proof for, the modern atheists not only promote the misconception of God, they also promote a misconception of science. Just because science explains how something happens doesn't explain why it happened. Professor Ludwig Wittgenstein has written, "The great delusion of modernism is that the laws of nature are explanations for the phenomena of nature." You see, science only explains things to a certain level. I love C.S. Lewis's classic illustration on this point. Suppose you come over to my house and the tea kettle is on the stove and it's boiling. Now, why is the tea kettle boiling? Well, science will say, because the temperature has reached 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius, and so the water boils. That's true. But the ultimate reason that it's on the stove boiling is because I wanted to be able to give you a cup of tea, so I turned the kettle on. Now, those explanations don't contradict. One speaks of science, the other speaks of agency. The question is, what does more to explain why the tea kettle is on, why the water is boiling? It's true. It's reached 212 degrees Fahrenheit, but the actual explanation, the reason it's on is because I wanted to offer you a cup of tea. What's the cause or agency behind the universe's existence? Well, most scientists will say that they now believe it was a Big Bang. All right, but what caused the Big Bang? Is it possible that, as the Bible asserted, that the Jews knew, even when I was going through high school, they were teaching still the steady state universe. I mean, they knew better, people knew better than that then, but the textbooks were just old. And that is that the universe has gone on and on. That was taught for hundreds and hundreds of years and believed, by the majority of scientists. But not those who were Christians. And the Jews, the Hebrews were saying for thousands of years that suddenly everything was created. Now, does it have to be just a meaningless accident, as atheists assert? Or could there be a God who's behind it? There's no scientific reason why God couldn't be behind it all, and there's no way scientifically to prove or disprove God's existence. Sir Isaac Newton spoke for many of the great pioneers of early science who were overwhelmingly Christian when he wrote that he was discovering the laws of science so that thinking people could see that there was a God behind the laws who'd put them all into place. The third confusing misconception the new atheists are promoting involves a misconception about faith. The new atheists have falsely asserted that faith is just a religious word that means believing where there's no evidence. In reality, faith is a word that applies to every area of your life. You will only put your money in a bank that you have faith in. You'll only sit in a chair that you have faith won't fall. You don't have 100% proof in any area of your life. How many of you had your parents genetically tested to make sure that they were your parents? The very fact that they put up with you and raising you was evidence of the fact that they must have been your parents. And even if you'd been genetically tested, they could have had a brother or sister, who didn't feel like they could raise the child that they had, and so they gave them to your parents. We don't have 100% proof for anything in life. You have faith that the paper the government prints, the money has real value, even though there's nothing that backs it up but faith in our government. Even science is based on some basic assumptions and fundamental postulates that have to be taken by faith. For example, that what we see all around us is reality, and actually we're not just brains in big jars connected to a computer or just ghosts in someone's dreams. Now, to get away from science fiction, any good mathematician will tell you that mathematics rests on some unprovable basic postulates that you just have to start with. Everyone operates their life on the basis of faith, and valid faith of any kind has evidence that supports it. Just as the Christian faith has rational reasons for believing it's true, that's why you have so many Nobel Prize-winning individuals who are people of faith. So the new atheists, who are basically scientific fundamentalists and mistakenly believe science is the only way of knowing anything, teach a whole bunch of things as fact that can't be proven by their own scientific method. They teach that science is the only way of knowing anything. There's no way to prove that. That matter is the only reality. They can't prove that. That God is nothing more than an illusion created by men. They can't prove that. And that faith is only a religious concept, when actually faith is a part of every area of every person's life every day, whether they're a believer or not a believer, whether they believe there's a God or whether they're an atheist. Now, to buttress their unprovable philosophy that's really their religion, not science, as they can't claim, the new atheists have a few silver bullets that they repeatedly use to silence most Christians. And I want to try to help you, be prepared for these, for as many as possible in this series. One of those is the belief that God, the belief in God and religion, causes most of the suffering in the world, or at least much of the suffering in the world. Does the belief in God really cause evil and suffering in the world? Well, first let's talk about all those supposedly religious wars. The Hindu and the Muslims in India are actually fighting over Kashmir. They're not fighting over religion. The Jews and the Palestinians are fighting for control of the land. The Protestants and Catholics in Ireland are fighting over self-rule. The truth is, while you can identify nations and tribes by their religious beliefs, these are political wars, people who want land and power and money. And an atheistic or religious Jew will kill an attacking atheistic or religious Palestinian in the Intifada. They don't really care what each other believe. And someone from Northern Ireland would kill a Protestant or Catholic or an atheistic British soldier during the Troubles. There's an old joke that comes from the days of the Irish Republican Army about a man who stumbled in to an IR area of operation. And one of the IRA insurgents said to him, "Are you Protestant or are you Catholic?" The man wisely said, "I'm an atheist." The IRA soldier, not knowing what to do with that, said to him, "Well, are you a Protestant atheist or are you a Catholic atheist?" You see, every lie has a kernel of truth in it that makes it believable, and the kernel of truth in our world today that makes this lie believable is Islamic extremism, where some terrible things are being done in the name of the God of Islam. But it's also true that all the religious extremists combined throughout all the ages of history don't begin to do the harm that the atheistic despots did in the last century. The actual truth is, while misguided Christians may have killed thousands and thousands, maybe several hundred thousands of people over the centuries, atheistic dictators killed more than 100 million people in just the last 70 years of the 20th century. How many people were killed in the 4 centuries of the Spanish Inquisition? Do you know? Millions and millions, you would think, to listen to atheists talk, but really only about 5 per year for a total of 2,000 over 4 centuries. How many people were killed as witches in Salem, in the Salem witch trials? 19. Now that's 2,000 too many, that's 19 too many, but Stalin and Mao and other explicitly atheistic dictators who killed every religious person of any religion that they could find, killed almost 100 million in the last century. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia killed 2 million in just 3 years. Bin Laden and even ISIS's most terrible achievements pale by comparison. The truth is that atheism is a bankrupt, nihilistic philosophy that's actually led to unbelievable evil, pain, and suffering in the world. You know, Christian missionaries are often heavily reviled because of some abuses of some missionaries, but the Christian missionaries are the ones that started most of the hospitals, schools, and universities around the world. It was Christians who ended slavery. Anyone who takes an unbiased look at Christianity will find that despite isolated abuses, everywhere Christianity spread, compassion and the value of human life increased, education increased, the place and the treatment of women improved, economic standards of living went up, and freedom and democracy flourished. Richard Dawkins attempts to run to the aid of his fellow atheists by asserting that Christians killed in the name of Christianity, but tyrants didn't kill in the name of atheism. Dawkins, who's a biologist, conveniently forgets his history that Karl Marx said religion was the opiate of the people, and one of the biggest goals of atheistic communism was to free the world from the shackles of God and religion, which is one of Dawkins' goals, to free the world from the shackles of God and religion. Now, just like communism, atheism may sound good to some people on paper, but in reality, this godless philosophy and godless governments have killed more people and brought more suffering into the world than any other philosophy. Why? Because, as Dostoevsky has said, without God, all things are permitted, and he should know he endured Soviet communism at its worst. So what basic conclusions can we draw as we begin our study of apologetics? First, that atheism is a belief system, in the same way Christianity is a belief system. But unlike atheism, Christianity is based on historical and archaeological and textual and experiential and other collaborating evidence. Where is the atheist evidence that there is no God? There's no proof of that fact scientifically, even though they continually suggest that there is. The list of impressive names that they can fit on a bulletin board, you couldn't fit in a 500-page book all the impressive names of people who have been devout believers today and throughout the ages. But the atheist says, well, look at all the evil and suffering in the world. How can there be an all-powerful and loving God in the face of such evil? Well, we're going to spend a whole Sunday in this series talking about that very point. The atheist says, well, if there's a God, why doesn't he remain hidden? Why doesn't he just reveal himself? Well, there are reasonable answers for that question as well that we're going to cover in this series. But what about miracles, the atheist retorts? The atheist David Hume said miracles are violations of nature, and we all know that we don't break the laws of nature. The laws of nature break us. The only problem is no one has ever proven that miracles are a violation of nature. In a world where we now know of quantum physics and mathematically you have to have at least 9 dimensions for everything we see and everything that we know that exists in the universe to exist. We only experience 4 of those dimensions, so there's a lot that we still don't know. Probably, I would guess that for most of the miracles I know of in the Old Testament, there's probably a natural explanation. I mean, why did the River Jordan dry up and they could walk across? Maybe there was a landslide. Maybe there's a natural thing. Why, did the Red Sea or the Reed Sea or whatever you want to think part for the Jews? Well, maybe there's some kind of windstorm. I don't know. The plagues of Egypt. There can be natural explanations for these things. The thing that's supernatural is the amazing timing that these happened at just the right moment. That points there might be something divine behind it. I love C.S. Lewis' illustration of miracles. Lewis wrote, if I'm staying in a hotel for 3 nights, and the first night I put $100 in the dresser drawer, and the second night I put another $100 for a total of $200 in the drawer, and the third night, if I look and there's only $50 in the drawer, do I assume that the laws of mathematics and nature have been broken, or the laws of the United States of America? And Lewis concluded, the only way I know a thief has been in the drawer is because I believe in the laws of mathematics. The people in the New Testament knew where babies come from. That's why when Mary told Joseph she was pregnant but hadn't been with another man, he didn't believe her. God had to send an angel to intervene before Joseph would believe Mary. The man born blind in John chapter 9, new people born blind didn't suddenly start seeing. That's why he told the Sanhedrin at great danger to his own personal safety that no one since the beginning of time had been able to do what Jesus did. As a Christian, I believe the laws of science, but what are these laws? They're not causes. Newton's laws never caused a single billiard ball to move in the history of the universe. People with pool cues do that. Laws describe what normally happened, but they don't straitjacket God. God normally allows the laws He established to function as He designated them to function, but He's perfectly free sometimes to reach into the system He created and do whatever He wants to do. Christians are not saying Jesus was raised from the dead by any natural processes. That would break the laws of nature. Christians are saying God reached into His creation to do something new. You see, the real question is the universe an open or a closed system? I believe it's an open system. The miracles in the New Testament are not violation of the laws of nature. They're the Creator reaching into His creation and doing something new that we can only recognize because we know the laws of nature that are the norm. I believe in the resurrection because it has historical evidence. That's not scientific evidence, but it's rational. Christianity has rational and reasonable answers for all the detractors' objections for anyone who has an open mind. That's why there's so many brilliant Nobel Prize winners who are rational people who are Christians. So remember, when the intellectual asserts there is no God, that's a personal opinion. That's their philosophy. But it's not a scientific statement because no one can prove whether we have an open or a closed universe and whether or not there is a God. You need to tattoo on your children's minds that not every statement made by a scientist is a statement of science. Remember, the explanation of the laws of nature don't disprove God. It merely states in the Christian's view how God designed things. The Bible asserts God is the agent behind all natural laws, discovered and undiscovered. And remember that most of science says nothing directly for or against the existence of God. Most of the evidence for God comes from other fields besides science, but those fields are no less valid than science. Science can greatly increase our faith because the more we understand how intricate God's creation is, the greater we realize the Creator is. Oxford scientist Sir Peter Medvar wrote in his book, Advice for Young Scientists, "It is very easy to see that science is very limited, and we do it no service to pretend that it can answer every question. The questions of a child prove that. Where did I come from? Where am I going? What is the meaning of life? To say that we came from nowhere, that life means nothing, and that we're going nowhere when we die are philosophical opinions completely unprovable by the scientific method." By contrast, John 20, verse 30 through 31 points us to the fact that Christianity is rooted in historical events that can be examined. John writes, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of His disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name. Christianity is the only philosophy or religion in the world that's rooted in historical, prophetic, and archaeological events. I want to invite you to begin to study the massive amounts of evidence for yourself. Stop just listening to other people and the shallow, supposedly scientific arguments that they offer that they cannot prove, and make your own investigation. General Lew Wallace set out to prove to himself once and for all that Christianity was a fraud. And the result of his study, his diligent study, was the novel Ben-Hur that became a movie, which was his testimony to the risen Christ, who he ended up accepting as Lord and Savior. And that's the experience of thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've taken the time to look for themselves. I invite you to begin your own investigation today. Sign up for a class. Sign up for a life group. There's going to be one on apologetics. As you go out, you'll see a booth this morning where you can sign up to begin to study for yourself. You know, I always tell people that God is self-validating. There are all kinds of reasons and arguments and things you can talk about, but to me, the simplest way to prove the reality of God, is simply to say, God, if you're real, I want to know you. I want to follow you. I want to be who you made me to be, if you're real. And then just begin to read and study God's Word. Begin to pray every day, taking everything to God, and you will either see that what you're going to see is you either live a life of the most amazing coincidences, the things that you pray about, things happen that you can't explain how they happen. You see, God wants you to know Him more than you want to know Him. And God says, you'll seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. This morning I invite you to begin your own investigation. Your eternity depends on it. And I invite you to study and know a few things so that when people casually throw out, well, everybody knows there is no God, you can say, well, 65% of the Nobel Prize winners, in the last 2 centuries, they believed that there was a God. They were Christians. Most people don't know things like that. So be prepared to give an answer for the hope that's in you, because people are being deceived. And people are being separated from a God who loves them and cares for them by people who have absolutely no proof, absolutely no evidence They just speak authoritatively. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.